Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Rago, and I'm the Executive Director of Environmental Forum of Marin. EFM was founded 50 years ago to educate people in Marin about our environment and to inspire them to take personal action on environmental issues. EFM is based in Marin County, which is on the unceded traditional homelands of the Coast Miwok people. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. By now, we are hoping you have all seen the Emmy award-winning documentary, 3 Ocean Advocates Inspiring Change. The film is still available for viewing if you haven't had a chance to see it until midnight tonight. I'd like to start by thanking Cynthia Abbott. In a few minutes, you'll be hearing from her. Cynthia is the director and producer of this wonderful film, and also the person who suggested this collaboration with EFM. This afternoon, we'll not only talk about the film, the state of our ocean, but also we're here to get inspired by advocates. As we mentioned in the description, you don't need to be a scientist or a celebrity to make a difference. So let's see, who will you be hearing from this afternoon? Well, as I mentioned, we're going to start with Cynthia Abbott. She is the one who started the project Every Second Breath Project. We'll talk with her for a few minutes, and then we're going to bring Dick Ogg on. Dick Ogg is a Bodega Bay fisherman and an advocate, and he's featured in her film. Then we're going to hear from our youth. We've got Dakota Peebler and Shay Barton coming. They're from Heirs to Our Oceans, and they're going to talk about the RAISE initiative. After them, we've got Sam Pierce joining us. He's with Story of Stuff. He's going to start by telling us a little bit about his own personal journey into advocacy. And he's going to let us know more about plastic pollution and its connection to the fossil fuel industry. After that, at approximately 5 o'clock or so, we're going to be hoping to hear from you. Well, we hope to hear from you earlier, because throughout this event, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please put them in the Q&A box. The Q&A box you'll find located at the bottom of your screen. You go ahead and put in a question, and our last 25 minutes or so, we're going to be answering those questions. We'll bring all the speakers back so you can hear again from them. So as I said, we're going to bring up Cynthia Abbott in just a minute, but first we're going to ask a poll question because we'd really like to hear from you. Let's see, is the poll question up? Yes, here we go. Okay, here it is. How much of the oxygen on Earth is produced by the ocean? Is it 10 to 30%, 30 to 50%, 50 to 80%, or over 80%? Looking like the answers are pretty much in. So it looks like most of you voted 50 to 80%, and that is correct. I found a NOAA article, and it says, scientists estimate that 50 to 80% of the oxygen production on Earth comes from the ocean. The majority of this production is from oceanic plankton, drifting plants, algae, and some bacteria that can photosynthesize. So we have quite a dependence on the ocean. And I would like, Cynthia, why don't you join me now? I'm gonna read your bio in a second, but that statistic I know has a lot of meaning for you because it's what drove you in a lot of your advocacy work and led you, I believe, to the name Every Second Breath Project. Now, Cynthia is an Emmy award-winning independent producer director of a short form environmental film who believes the power of storytelling can change our collective vision of the ocean and create a new vision for the ocean's future, one that is protected and thriving. So Cynthia, thank you. So can you tell us more about your advocacy journey and what you hope our audience gains by seeing this film?
Hi, Kim. Thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
All right. And I'd like to thank the forum for partnering with this screening and the webinar with these wonderful speakers that are to follow. Just a brief overview of Every Second Breath Project. It's a series of short films that are on individuals, ordinary people who have a love and passion for the ocean and are taking actions to help heal it. The stories are, the goal of the stories are to inform the viewer of the ocean crises that's going on, as well as motivate them to take actions, because there's something that we each can do. It's in our hands. We are the contributors to the ocean crises, and we can solve these problems. And I began about 12 years ago being very concerned and despondent about the direction our environment was going in. It was just, it's so rapidly changing. And I couldn't quite decide where to put my energies and efforts. And after a lot of thought, and I did take the master class with the forum, which was very beneficial, and they put a lot of focus on advocacy. And I'm not a scientist or a policymaker or a politician. And so I gave it a lot of thought, and then I realized that I have this skill and talent as a filmmaker, and that I could reach a very broad audience with the issues of the environment. And originally I was going to work more generally, but after it was about a 25-year hiatus, I started doing filmmaking again. I had been doing it in my early 20s and 30s. And so I had to retrain. So everything had moved into 100% digital. So I was doing training at the local media center and creating environmental shorts on people of Marin. And most of them turned out to be about the ocean, which was perfect for me because I love the ocean and I have a passion for the ocean. And I was researching to do another interview for these shorts I was doing. They were being broadcast on the local news station on the station. And there was an article in the byline said that every second breath you breathe comes from the ocean. And I read further and I was so surprised because I didn't know that. And here I am, a coastal person. I've lived along the coast my entire life, lived in Hawaii, along the Indian Ocean. And I was a little embarrassed to myself because I didn't know that. I thought it came from the rainforest and the trees and the grasslands. So I took this personal survey of friends, family, and almost everyone I knew. And I'd ask them all the same question: where does over 50% of the oxygen you breathe come from? And I would say over 80% of the people that I questioned didn't say the ocean. They had plants, the rainforest, the same assumptions that I had. So at that point, when I started to realize the magnitude that the ocean has on our very existence, that without a healthy ocean, we don't have a healthy planet, I decided to focus my filmmaking on shorts on the ocean. And I partnered with my co-producer, co-director, Andrea Leland, and a wonderful production team, The Understory, and that's Fabian Aguera and incredible editor, Maya Piscato, and we started this series. And I thought that the Every Second Breath Project is a way to tie the importance of the ocean with these films, the project itself.
And I think, Cynthia, you did just such a wonderful job because it's so informative but it's also so inspiring. So I'm going to move on to Dick Ogg, who is one of the people featured in the film. So Dick Ogg is a Bodega Bay fisherman and brings over 45 years of experience working in the fisheries. He's actively involved in supporting and maintaining healthy fisheries by serving on the Dungeness Crab Gear Working Group, Dungeness Crab Task Force, Cordell Bank Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council, the Spud Point Advisory Board. He's also a director in the Bodega Bay Community Fishermen's Association, vice president of the Bodega Bay Fishermen's Marketing Association, EA Waters Committee, and director on the California Salmon Council. So, Dick, are you there?
I think so.
There you are.
Okay.
And one of my favorite things, Dick, is that you join us from your boat.
No.
And I know how busy you are and how little time, but just really enjoyed you in the film so much. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, you talk about how the water is your home, and you tell that beautiful story of the whale that's timing you and swimming next to you. Tell us more what it's like for you when you're out on the sea.
It's funny to describe this to people, because it's a feeling that, you know, it comes from your heart, it comes from your spirit, and the sense of the freedom that you have on the water is just, you know, it's really, really special for me. My two crew members are young, and you know, I try to emphasize the importance of us as the, you know, true conservationists, you know, and that we're here to, you know, maintain that purity out there, and to provide a, you know, a resource to the public that they can enjoy and also be proud of, you know, and know that it came from your local fishermen, the ones that care about what is going on out there and how we can take care of it. The creatures that we have the opportunity to be around, you know, you know, that's a really special opportunity. We see whales every time we go. And not only whales, but killer whales, albatross, you know, very rare albatross at times, you know, a number of different, you know, animals all the time. And, you know, the funny thing is, as fishermen, we tend to take that for granted. And if you just, you know, sit back and look at what you have in front of you all the time, it's pretty amazing. So I'm extremely fortunate that I have the opportunity to be able to do this.
Oh, that is wonderful. So you mentioned that fishermen are the conservationists or the true custodians of the ocean. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, if one really thinks about our ability to make a living from the ocean, or from, you know, the resources that are there, we need to keep things sustainable. And we have to be cognizant of what we do and how we do it, so that that resource is always there. So we don't want to create pollution. We don't want to do damage to the environment. We want to be sure that what we're doing is you know, is productive and, you know, environmentally sound. It's extremely important as a captain, especially as an old one here, you know, to be able to, you know, relay that information to the younger captains and the crew members, so that when they go back out, their thoughts are, well, you know what? He never threw any garbage in the water. I'm not going to do it either. So, you know, I'm not going to stand there and tell the guys, don't do that. You can't do this. But you want to try to set a good example. And our port is very good about that. I mean, most fishermen are only interested in, being able to provide that resource to the public. And we have become a lot more aware of the impact that, all the different things that we do has on the ocean.
So you said that that crab fishing does not ghost fish, and I think that's one of the examples of pollution. But what is that? What does ghost fish mean?
Well, the actual definition of ghost fishing is could be, and it typically isn't. The implication is lost gear. All right, so that means that if gear, whether it's a long line, whether it's a pot type, shrimp pot, rock crab, slimy, whatever the fishery is, if something gets lost and it's left, it's considered ghost gear. Ghost fishing is a little bit different. And the one thing about the crab fishery is that we've thought about how to keep it sustainable and not have bycatch. And if the pot is lost and unretrievable, typically what we're required to have a cotton, a piece of rope that degrades and opens up and allows the crabs to escape. In addition to that, the fishermen designed an escape ring, which is, I believe, 4¼ inches in diameter, which allows the smaller crabs to, get out. And so it keeps the bycatch down, so that the smaller crabs aren't, brought up to the surface in a rapid amount. We bring the pots up very, very quickly. So it's better not to do that if you can help it to the smaller, crabs. So we've thought a lot about how to, keep this a sustainable fishery, and I think we've done extremely well.
So for people who might not know, will you define what bycatch means?
Okay, if your targeted species is, for instance, if our targeted species is salmon, and another rockfish or another type of fish is caught at that time, that's considered bycatch.
Okay.
And so we're able to pretty much say that we have very, very, very little bycatch. And the one thing about pot fisheries are that bycatch can be re-released. It's not killed. So if a fish comes up and it's in the pot, we can throw it overboard. And it's good. I'm sorry.
And are a lot of these changes you're talking about, are these newer changes you were instrumental in making, or is this the industry in general has been going in this direction for a while?
The industry in general has actually been going in this direction.
Good.
Most of these, like the escape rings and the cottons were they became an issue. I can't remember how many years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, because of lost gear. And then, the crabs couldn't get out, and, obviously we didn't want that to happen. So when we put these degradable cottons in there, it now allows the crabs to get out, and, it just keeps the resource, healthier.
That's
I should
great.
say. Yeah.
So you said you've been out at sea for over 45 years, and you've talked about a lot of changes you've seen. What are some of the changes you've seen while you've been out there?
As of recent, it's the changes have been more obvious, I should say. You know, they've occurred they've occurred more quickly or they've, excuse my, I've been in meetings all day, so I'm like, my brain is mush here. They that's a good word too. I like that. They've been more rapid in their changing. I mean, the migration patterns have begun to kind of typically move north. And so I can give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
The originally we have you know, being on these groups that watch whale migration, or the ESA listed humpback whales, we've always been able to look at the staging area that the whales tended to where they tended to group together. It typically was in Monterey. And we still see that when they begin to come back and migrate north. But what we've been seeing is, instead of the whales being in the Monterey Bay Area, when they begin to form up and travel south towards Baja, is that they've begun to keep their congregation closer to the Farallon Islands. And that was a prediction. I believe the NOAA scientists talked about that. They indicated that we were going to be seeing northerly movements of all the species. And you know, in all honesty, that's what we are seeing. You know, things are beginning to continue to migrate north.
Okay, and as the migration patterns change, you described in the film that then there's a collision really between the fishermen and the whales. And what were some things you were seeing happen, and how did you solve this, or start to solve this problem?
Well, we, in 2014, 15, 2015, 16, there was an extremely hot blob of water offshore.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had a very high domoic acid issue in 2016. That gave way to an anomalous situation where we were delayed and we could not go fishing until March. And the ESA listed humpback whales were migrating south. And as a result, there were 22 confirmed Dungeness crab entanglements. Mm. That stimulated the Department of Fish and Wildlife to form the Dungeness crab gear working group, of which I've been part of since the onset. And what we did was we began to evaluate what we could do as fishermen, simply to eliminate, you know, the possible interaction that we had seen in 2016. So we began to say, okay, you know, I did a lot of lines surveys. In other words, we would put a crab pot out, and then there were sensors that we put on the lines so that we'd be able to tell how the line traveled and moved in the water. Once we realized that certain aspects of that line, when we had certain leads on there to keep the floating line under the water, it tended to create these W's. Hmm. So the first thing we did was say, okay, we're going to try to eliminate the opportunity for slackline in the water. So one of the biggest issues is when you have slackline, if anybody's a diver on you know, this listening, they'll know that when kelp is very limp, the first thing that happens when you run into it is it wants to wrap around your appendage. And so it's exactly the same thing that happens with a rope in the water. It wants to wrap around the appendage, especially if there's a piece of lead there to keep it underwater. It creates kind of a loop. Once we realized that, we began to go to a line that's called a neutral line that no longer uses those leads. And then we shortened everything up. So everything was tight. So the idea is that when an animal goes by it, it has a tendency to roll off the flute or the body. The other thing we did was decrease the lengths of the buoys up on top and minimize the amount of buoys we had. And as a result of all this work and all this evaluation, the following year, there were only 9, not that I like that, but there were only 9 entanglements that were confirmed within our season. The following year after that, if I'm not mistaken, it went to 5. The following year after that, it went to 3. And now it's down to actually none. We have had no in-season entanglements, in the last 2 years. So have the fishermen really worked to do this? Yes. Have we paid attention? Yes. Are we aware of what's happening with the migration? Absolutely. So we put all this effort and all this energy into minimizing our opportunity to interact with these animals, and we've done a very, very good job.
That's wonderful. I mean, so much of your time goes to your advocacy. What are the costs for being an advocate?
I don't know. I mean, I never really thought about that. You mean if it's financial, it wouldn't matter. I don't really know that there's cost, except you just have to believe in what you're doing, and just more or less just do it. Be there, be part of the system, make it work. I don't know. I just I don't know. I never really thought about costs because I don't think there is any. It's
wonderful.
It's just that's what you do.
That's wonderful. So the last question I have for you is, most of our audience has seen the film. What do you want them to take out of it? What do you want them to know about the film that you think is important?
I'm going to change sides here because the sun's starting to come in. Oh gosh, I haven't really thought about that. I just would like for people to know that we as fishermen really care. I mean, we're trying to do our best. We love what we're doing. And I just want people to know that we're really there to be able to provide and support a sustainable fishery for everyone. And the last thing we would do is try and damage something that allows us to be able to make a living. I mean, that's what we do.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I know you've had a really full day, so I appreciate you so much being here with us this afternoon. So Dick, you're off the hook for a little bit, so to speak. And next we are going to go hear from 2 youth advocates, Dakota Peebler and Shay Barton. So Dakota Peebler and her sibling Charlie co-founded the youth-led Heirs to Our Oceans. It is committed to empowering, educating, and connecting youth in protecting their ocean and waterways in climate action. Dakota also formed the RAISE Initiative, which they're going to talk about today, which stands for Regenerative Agriculture and Indigenous Systems for Our Environment. I have to mention too that Dakota is a competitive hip hop dancer, and an active member in the Youth Advisory Council for the UN, and she has also presented for TEDx Marin. Shay Barton is 17 years old. She's also a member of Heirs to Our Ocean and a member of the Pescadero Heirs to the Oceans chapter and the Raise Initiative, which they will talk about. And she is passionate about building a better relationship with the planet through climate action, food justice, and youth empowerment. So welcome, Dakota and Shay.
Thank you so much for having us. Hello, everyone. My name is Dakota Peebler, as Ms. Kim said. I'm 16 years old. I'm a co-founder of Heirs to Our Oceans and a member of the Raise Initiative, and I'm in Northern California in the Bay Area. To get started, I wanted to give a little bit of information as to what Heirs to Our Oceans is. Next slide, please. So Heirs to Our Oceans is a youth-led initiative that is really dedicated to the empowerment and education and connection of all youth everywhere in ocean and water protection, as well as climate action. And many youth in Heirs to Our Oceans and in our initiatives, such as the Raise Initiative, have really personal connections and reasons as to why they have joined, because as we know, the issues facing our oceans and planet are really not specific to one location, as they are all affecting us all to a certain degree. So Shay and I today wanted to tell you a little bit as to what we're doing and really why we're doing it. So I started off with my interest and passion for the oceans, really being interested in sea otters. I loved them very much, and it was a childhood interest that I had. And as you know, I researched these sea otters, more and more was coming up about sea otter mortality, sea otter as well as sea lion mortality at a large scale along the California coast. And it concerned me a lot because not only did I love sea otters as an animal, but they're also incredibly important as a keystone species. And so I did a little bit of digging, and what I found out was, as Dick was mentioning, domoic acid is a really, really big issue on the West Coast, not only because, you know, it's impacting fisheries, but it's also impacting the life inside of our oceans, such as marine mammals. And this is because it makes its way up the food chain and is a neurotoxin. And so domoic acid is produced by Pseudonychia, which is a diatom. And as you can see in this slide, when it blooms, when this diatom blooms, it creates a sort of red sheen and it produces domoic acid. And this stimulation that causes the production of this acid is stimulated by nutrients, a large influx of nutrients. And what we see is a lot of these nutrients come from fertilizer runoff as well as animal manure runoff. So I tracked, you know, these high mortality rates of sea otters back to an overall larger crisis, which is that of our food system that we're seeing, especially in the United States, but we're seeing it all across the world. And this is because largely what we see in the more industrialized food system is that profit is put over the health of our planet and the health of people. And all these personal stories, these youth who have personal stories and personal connections to what's happening to our planet, is really what formed Heirs to Our Oceans and what formed Raise. And I'll pass it off to Shay.
Hey everyone, as was mentioned, my name is Shay. I'm 17 and I've been a member of Heirs for many years. Super excited to be here. Could I get the next slide, please? So this is the town that I grew up in and am from, Pescadero, California. I don't know, some of y'all might have been here and experienced our little town before. It's a very close-knit community. It is also a very agricultural area. Like there's kind of a ton of farms right around where I'm at. I grew up very aware of kind of different methods of farming and how some were better like for soil health than others and how some were better for human health than others, because I was just always surrounded by like food and farms, but I did not immediately connect ocean health to our food system. That was a connection that wasn't there for me until a little bit later. One of the things we deal with in our community is our school does not have potable drinking water from the tap because there's a nitrate contamination issue in the groundwater at Pescadero. It affects our school. It affects some housing in the community as well. Like there are some households that don't have clean drinking water because of the nitrate contamination. And it was always just kind of something that I was like vaguely aware of and accepted and didn't really think too hard about when I was younger. And then when I joined Heirs to Our Oceans, I became kind of more active in researching the water quality issues that were impacting me and impacting my community. And I looked into the issue of nitrate contamination. And what I discovered was that nitrate in groundwater can come from multiple sources, but one of the most common sources is fertilizer runoff from agriculture. So in areas that have like conventional agriculture around them, there is actually a lot of reoccurring issues with groundwater contamination for people in their homes, in their communities. And it was kind of shocking to me because I'd never really known where nitrate pollution could come from. I just never learned about it. And so next slide, please. After looking into it, I kind of developed this passion for the connection between water quality and our food systems and human health and like all these different things. And access to clean water is something that's, really, really an important issue for me now. And so when I joined RAISE, it was kind of a way for me to bring together like these things that are really important to me, like ocean health, water quality health, and then also farming in a way that's beneficial to human health and to soil health and to the rest of the planet. And RAISE to me is like a really great union of all these different issues that are so important and so interconnected as to almost be kind of interchangeable.
Next slide, please. So we, along with other youth who have other personal connections to the issues our planet is facing, we formed the RAISE initiative, as Kim said, the Regenerative Agriculture and Indigenous Systems for Our Environment initiative. And this is really because we saw the link between these harmful industrialized agricultural practices and the crises we're seeing that are impacting our oceans, people, communities, and our environment in general. So the RAISE initiative is one, raising awareness, continuing our learning, educating ourselves and others about really the benefits of learning from and acknowledging traditional ways and indigenous systems in growing food and stopping these industrialized agricultural practices. We're also working towards building a movement and developing youth connections around the world and connecting in purpose to take on these challenges that we're going to be inheriting. And 3, we're also working towards seeking policy change where we can mandate this shift away from these harmful industrialized agricultural practices in a way that is sustainable and safe for all stakeholders, including farmers. In an interview actually that I found with Ade Romero Briones, who is the Director of Programs for the Native Agriculture and Food Systems for the First Nations Development Institute, I found a quote that I believe is really important and means a lot for what the RAISE initiative is doing. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share it really fast. She stated that we want to create systems that are rebirthing a healthy environment. In order to do that, we need to include Indigenous people. So my definition of regenerative agriculture is one that includes a true history of the land and the environment and people's health that starts prior to contact. And I think that this is super important whenever we discuss regenerative agriculture and something very important to the RAISE initiative.
Next slide, please. Okay, so in the middle there is the cover of something that our initiative worked very hard on for quite a while. That is the RAISE research report, and it was written by some youth of RAISE over the course of about a year. and it is expert reviewed with contributions from the voices of young people all over the world. And it's basically the result of like interviews, research, and writing, and then this whole journey we took kind of after the initiative formed, where we learned about the history of agriculture, about the science available today, about the policy that's around today, soil health and the connections between soil health and water quality, about indigenous agricultural techniques and traditional ecological knowledge, and like so much other stuff. And this report was kind of a huge step in us like developing the goals for our initiative and developing our understanding of the issue and what we should be doing about it. It's pretty cool. It's available to read on our website. And we hope that it's both a way to become familiar with the values behind our initiative and then also act as a resource that can be distributed to people who are interested in learning more about regenerative agriculture as an idea. And now that we've completed our paper, we're kind of in the next stage of like expanding our initiative so that more young people can come together and educate themselves about the food system, share the challenges that are relevant to their communities and their lives, and become empowered and supported to work on addressing these issues. Next slide, please. So us Youth of Raise are currently working very hard to grow our Raise team. We're continuing to build out our team of members and also advisory council representatives, because we want a team of adult scientists and farmers and indigenous leaders who can help advise us and guide us. And we aim to build a diverse core Raise team that represents fully communities impacted by the issues of degenerative agriculture and those who hold traditional ecological knowledge. Our vision is to create a network of youth involved in local to international food system reform, with hubs of youth in the United States and across the world, who as members of Raise have opportunities through the initiative to connect with and be supported by other youth with the same dream. And in order to do this, in the next stage of Raise, we need to expand the capacity of our initiative to conduct outreach and support other youth in attending events and doing community work, to develop deeper connections with farmers and accumulate resources about regenerative agriculture and so much more. Next slide, please. So I just want to kind of wrap it up by saying thank you so much for the work that all of you do. I know that all of you here today care so much about healing our relationship with our planet and are doing amazing things to make that happen. And thank you so much for supporting the next generation too, as we mobilize to create change. And if you are interested in anything that we've kind of shared with you, these are some resources to learn more about our initiative and get in touch with us for anything you'd like to get in touch with us about. So there's this slide right here. And thank you so much for your attention and for all the great things that, you know, that the other panelists have shared and will share today.
Well, Shay, thank you so much. And Dakota, thank you so much. And first, I wanted to ask another poll question. So if the poll question can come up and we can go ahead and there we are, and the audience can answer. Since what year has half of all plastic been produced? 1975, 1990, 2005.
Hey everyone, hey Kim, thanks so much for the introduction. Great to be with you here this afternoon. My name's Sam Pierce. I'm a campaign manager with the Story of Stuff project. We're a Bay Area environmental nonprofit, really looking at sort of shifting our focus away from the make, use, waste system. So I have been working on sort of campaigns around environmental issues, human rights issues for a number of years. And, you know, I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of intersection between the many great talks here around the oceans, the threat to our oceans, and plastic pollution. I'm sure many of you will be aware of some of it. Okay, so interesting. So it looks like we have the response to the polls, and everyone is very well educated here. So 61% have the right answer in 2005. So That is to say that half of all plastic has been produced since 2005, maybe even later, since that statistic is already a couple of years old. But it really speaks towards the fact that, you know, the plastic that we produce is not being produced at a linear rate, but is increasing exponentially. So that's something I want to come on to later in the talk. Thank you for the slides. That's just my intro slide there. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions or want to get in touch. So how did I get involved in plastics specifically? I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I was sharing with Kim one kind of light bulb moment I had around 10 years ago. I was working with a series of environmental and human rights defenders based in Guatemala. And they were under threat of violence, intimidation from various different corporate and kind of state angles. One of the projects I worked on was an exhumation, and this was a number of families that had actually buried loved ones in the middle of the civil war in Guatemala in around 1982. And this was the first moment, this is around 2010, that they were actually going to kind of exhume and bury the bodies of their relatives. And on one of these trips to the, taking this exhumation, one of the things that I noticed was that, so in each burial, there would be a memento or something that was buried with a person to symbolize what they did or who they were. And in one of these cases, I saw a plastic colander or a strainer. It was the first thing I saw. And it was absolutely identical to the same colander that they had been using in our kind of cooking night by night. And for me, it was a kind of a light bulb moment of knowing that in a tropical forest, that an item of that type that had been in the ground for 25 years and looked basically identical was something that was very persistent. And that, of course, is the case that we've come to see with plastics, that it doesn't really break down. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. So we've spoken about the oceans, of course, have been a major theme this afternoon. And I suppose I think about the oceans as the kind of canary in the coal mine with respect to kind of plastic pollution. That is to say that, you know, we live on a blue planet. The ocean covers the majority of our planet. And so perhaps it's not surprising that if there was a place that we were trying to put things that we had nowhere to go, that it would end up in the ocean. What do I mean by the canary in the coal mine? I suppose some of the first images that came out that were most striking, I think, around plastic pollution was the images of Midway Island, you know, the birds with kind of lighters in their bellies, the Pacific Ocean gyre, and this idea, the corresponding image on the bottom left, this idea of the kind of a plastic island, or perhaps more accurately a plastic soup. And then, you know, the image, the video of the turtle having its straw removed from its nose are very kind of images, I think, that are difficult for many of us to forget. And I'm sure many of you will know that around 8 to 12 million tons of plastic enter the ocean each year. It's obviously a huge issue. And of course, plastic doesn't break down. That is one of the main problems, right? So it doesn't biodegrade in the way that organic life does. There have been some really striking kind of revelations about that. So when the particles become smaller and smaller, they are more able to kind of enmesh themselves into our different ecosystems and our ecologies. So a researcher and writer, Rebecca Altman, I believe, presented and spoke about the fact that she has seen evidence, or at least research evidence, of the fact that plastic is actually infusing itself with organic life forms now. So we're actually seeing plastic become part of living organisms. So that should be a very significant wake-up call. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of plastics. Why have we got to where we are today? And I think the main point I want to make is that it's not a coincidence. It is by design. So oftentimes wars are very significant accelerators or drivers of new industrial uses of innovation in terms of different types of industry. And so, World War II was certainly an example of the way in which there was, a pursuit and desire to create more things, essentially, battlefield things that were often either lightweight, that were adaptable and cheap to make. And in many ways, plastic was a very successful product for many of those things. Coming out of the war, these industries have been created. So there was a sense of how can we apply some of the materials and the ideas to a kind of a commercial and a residential way of living. And we're talking about 1950s America. It's a booming economy. The idea, disposable income is becoming, an idea. And so there was an increasing focus in those years of how can we market plastics to households, to families, to businesses. And so this image here is an image of Life magazine, 1955, front cover. And it's this celebration of disposability, of disposable products. And of course, we think of those now as being synonymous with plastics. So much like, in particular, housewives and women were the target of adverts around for cigarettes and smoking as a symbol of independence and kind of creating a new identity for themselves. The same could be said in a way about disposable plastics and the way that they could liberate women in the household from doing household chores. So it's a very kind of, that image I think is very symbolic for where we are today. So moving on to the following slide. I think the main point there is that after 30 years of that kind of disposability, the idea of waste became more visible in different ways. And that is when in sort of the 70s and 80s, there was a discussion about how do we create, how do we remove concern about waste? And that is really where the time that came with the kind of birth of the recycling, the idea of recycling. Again, if you move on a generation, I think now there's an understanding that recycling was largely designed for industry process, from a kind of an industry PR perspective. That is to say that they were concerned about how do we stop making people concerned about waste, and if there's an idea that our products could just be turned into a new product, then that fear would go away. And I think that has largely been a successful strategy. Now we know that with plastics that recycling is very ineffective. Just about 9% of plastics have been recycled, and only about 2% of that have actually been effectively recycled. That is like for like recycling, rather than something being kind of downcycled. So this slide is, I've talked about an escape hatch for the fossil fuel industry. So plastics come from fossil fuels. And you know, it is one of the things that I would like you to kind of leave with thinking about today, is just this sense that oftentimes we think about with industries that they're driven by demand. You know, people talk about, well, if it wasn't in demand, it wouldn't happen, etc. With plastics, it is one of the industries that has generally been driven by supply and not demand. And that is why, although we all have a really important role to play in our own behaviors, creating kind of systems change is more important, because it gets to the supply issue. So I spoke about 2005, right, as being this kind of, this is when half the amount of plastic produced has been produced since then. That time period coincides with, in many ways, the early stages of the boom in fracking in the United States, hydraulic fracturing, a kind of new and innovative way to access more oil and gas from the ground. And although financially the fracking industry has not been particularly successful, it has been very successful at getting hold and pumping very, very large quantities of oil and gas from the ground. And so this is what I'm talking about when it comes to demand. So essentially what's happened is one of the kind of byproducts of the fracking process is a gas called ethane. It was formerly considered a waste product, but after a while they realized that they could turn this ethane gas, into ethylene through a process called cracking, where you're breaking open the molecules and turning it into ethylene, which is the feedstock for a huge wide range of plastics. And so they were able to use, you know, formerly a waste product and turn it into a product that could be marketed. So that was very cheap. And of course, the fracking industry was you know, financially incentivized in a number of ways, making it doubly cheap. So over that period, there was an enormous boom in the fracking industry. And as a result, there was a tremendous amount of plastic. And of course, many of the other materials that we use and have seen around us are materials that they couldn't compete financially with that landscape. And that is the reason why we see so much plastic today, more than even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That is the primary reason, I would say, amongst others. So we have a huge challenge. And like some of the other panelists have spoken about, I think, we see how the issue of plastics kind of intersects with the issue more broadly of fossil fuels. And so in many ways, fossil fuels obviously is something that are coming under the microscope right now around the kind of various kind of supply chain issues, along with the Russian war in Ukraine. At this stage, the scale of the petrochemical build out is enormous in the United States. We're on the predictions are that there will be another 325 new or expanded petrochemical applications in the coming few decades. And that would, if that happens, we're set to double or triple the amount of plastic that is produced. So, you know, I certainly work with my organizations, and there is a huge movement of organizations there that are working to stop that from happening, because it is very hard to shift our kind of behaviors and when the infrastructure has been built. So it's really important that that doesn't come to pass, and there are a number of things that we need to do to prevent that from happening. And so move on to the next slide, please. So when it comes to how we win, I think there was a growing recognition that many people were fighting the same problem of plastic and plastic pollution, without knowing that they were focused on the same thing. So there are a lot of oceans advocates that were really, really concerned about the buildup of plastics in the ocean. At the same time, we have like frontline, fence line communities. If you go to places like Long Beach in California or Stanislaus County, there are 2 incinerators there. There are communities we work with there whose air pollution is whose air is being polluted by plastic waste that is being incinerated and putting dioxins into the air. Or at the same time, when you look at places like New Orleans, Texas Gulf South, Ohio River Valley, these are the 3 kind of core hubs for the petrochemical build out. There are many communities who have been on the front lines of that industry. And so there are a number of organizations and individuals that came together and said, we need to make sure that there is a shared understanding of what is happening and who it is happening to, who are the people that get to speak about this issue, and who are the people that aren't able to speak about this issue. And so this image really shows the kind of the through line of industry. But in each of those cases, there are communities that are affected. And so the strategy was to create a movement, this movement, the Break Free from Plastics movement, that was designed to kind of unite many of the people that were being affected by these different parts of the plastics life cycle in order to shift it. And that's I know a lot of this content is very heavy, but this is one of the things that is really exciting to me, and that I have a lot of hope in, because in the space of the sort of 4 years that I've been working on this issue, it's tremendous seeing how this combined strategy is helping to shift the way that the media is reporting on plastics, who has the chance to speak about it, and how it's being talked about, and has undergone a really significant shift in those years. And it's not only about communication strategy, it's about how we win, and how we make sure that the victories that we have in one place are not simply pushing the problem onto other communities. So in many cases, we saw that in the past, what happens is California's kind of lofty recycling goals really were papering over the fact that a lot of plastic was being shipped overseas and sent to China, where it was being sorted and recycled by the informal economy. So there's an important connection there to understand that all our victories have to be connected. We need to be working in greater solidarity, and we've seen real strides on that in the last year or two. So just moving on to the next slide, just a couple minutes left here. So what are the green shoots that I'm seeing? What are the things that are making me feel positive? So one of them is the fact that the old story is crumbling. I think there is a new and emergent story about what is happening, and it's really hard to address a problem unless there is a sort of a consensus about what is happening. And so this new story is exciting to me. We're seeing a kind of global solidarity movement fighting the root causes of plastic pollution, not just their symptoms. And there's an explosion of efforts to regulate this industry and to push back on the problem. So if you look at, if you look at the counties across California, there is an incredible patchwork of bills and laws that have been passed to reduce the sale of single-use packaging. Packaging is a huge part of the problem, of course. And it gets harder the higher that you work up. But even we've seen some really strong legislation at the state level, at the national level, and internationally. So a number of my colleagues internationally have just returned from a set of United Nations discussions And I'm really pleased to say that there have been really meaningful steps forwards to create a framework for the next United Nations treaty that would regulate the entire life cycle of plastics. So that is looking right from production through to disposal. And so that's a really promising, promising sign of how far we've come and the important work that many of my colleagues are working on. And it is showing that there is real progress being made. So with that, I think that kind of covers my presentation for the most part. I have some other links that I can include in the email of things that people can do for those that are interested. But with that, great to speak to you all today, and happy to stay on and answer any questions if there are any.
So Sam, we're going to start Q&A in just a minute, but I don't think that I had a chance to read your bio, and I think it might be good to tell everybody what your role is at Story of Stuff and how do you fit into all this, the equation that you just talked about, the advocacy against the plastic.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So my role at the Story of Stuff project is a campaign manager with a focus on plastic pollution specifically. I work both. Story of Stuff has focused largely on two areas. One is kind of narrative and storytelling work. So I think there's a growing recognition about the importance of not just what is happening, but how we think about and understand what is happening. And so to that end, we are thinking about how people understand the issues around plastic pollution. So one of the major efforts that we've worked in that space over the last few years is working on a movie, The Story of Plastics, which is available on our website. I can share the link shortly. But that, in many ways, has been a long-standing effort to promote many of these frontline communities and allow them to speak in their own terms about their experiences with plastic and the ways in which we're all connected through that. So that was one part of it, through the kind of storytelling and video production. The other is around campaigns, specifically focusing on kind of plastic legislation. So we've been involved in a number of legislative efforts in California here at the state level, and working with this movement, the Break Free from Plastic movement, to make sure that we're kind of co-strategizing on how we can work together on passing really good legislation, how we can stop bad legislation from taking place. And so, like I said, there's some really fantastic work happening at the local level. We're trying to push that up at the state level now, and there are some strong pieces of legislation I'm expecting to come to see this year. And federally, it's still tough because there are many strong vested interests in keeping things the way they are. But even there, we've seen real signs of progress in terms of kind of meaningful plastics regulation. So there is a lot happening. It just takes a little time, but it's promising to see how quick things are moving on that front.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think with plastics, it feels very overwhelming, because you said it's an industry that has been pushed by supply. Mm-hmm. And now they've found, with fracking, you said, waste products to be able to make more plastics. And so it just seems like it's getting worse and worse. But I think what you're telling us is that the grassroots movements matter, that this is where the energy is coming from, is that local advocacy that then goes up to the higher level. And that makes me really happy to hear that, because I think in an industry like this that's so big, with a problem that's so big, it's just another example where what you do locally matters.
I wonder if I could just underscore that point, Kim, because
Please do.
it's such an important one. I think there's a tendency for us all to think that, you know, someone else, it might be better positioned to do something, or you know, when there's a victory, you look at these people and we put them on pedestals, but in reality, you're absolutely right. As an example, you know, one of the biggest petrochemical facilities anywhere in the United States is planned to come online in Louisiana in a stretch called Cancer Alley, because it's known for its level of industrial pollution. And we've been working there with a grassroots activist. She literally retired, a special ed teacher some 3 years ago. And she decided to spend some time working on trying to prevent this absolutely massive, sprawling new plastics facility. And it's incredible the work that she has done with her community. She has made major inroads into stopping this new facility coming online. And you know, now that she's taken a stand, we've seen a lot of groups kind of supporting her work, her community's work. And so, you know, I think we all have experienced or seen when we take a moment to say enough is enough, that generates real power and interest, and we all have a role to play there.
That's great. I think I'm going to ask you one question, then I want everyone to come back. So we got a question that, are all plastics equally bad for the environment?
You know, that's a good question. I think I would say no. I think there are two elements to the issue with plastics. One is that you know, in some ways, there's this question of, do we need to shift towards almost like mimicking kind of compostable systems that break down? Do we need to move towards disposability where it actually disposes, or do we need to create a system of circularity where we reuse everything and we're not wasting our products? And I think in reality, it may be some combination of the two of them. I think what I would say is the vast majority of plastics really can't and won't be recycled. There are examples, PET, so a plastic bottle is made of PET, polyethylene tetrafilate, is probably one of the few types of plastic that can be typically widely recycled, as long as it's not being contaminated. So I don't know if any of you kind of participate in the deposit return system or the bowl bill. So sometimes you can get your deposit money back. If you bring a plastic bottle back that way, chances are it's going to get recycled. So, you know, maybe if you see the numbers on a piece of plastic packaging, 1 or 2 has a chance of being recycled. Beyond that, not really.
So if it's not 1 or 2, then it's most likely. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Sam, too, for presenting. It's such a big topic, and we do know that it relates back to Cynthia's movie, where part of it was talking about all the plastic that's found in the ocean. I had another question that came through. This one is on a different topic, but it's for Dakota and Shay, and it says, how do you reach urban kids who, unlike you, don't have the opportunity to see the impact of farming practices on the ocean firsthand?
Shay, do you want to go first, or should I start?
You can go ahead.
Okay. This is a really good question, and I thank you for whoever asked it. You know, while in our presentation, we largely talked about the impacts on people close to the ocean and, you know, regards to farming, but obviously, you know, with the food system, that's not just what's going on, that's not just the issues. An heir from Uganda, her name is Latifa. She has done work with this initiative, the Raise Initiative, and she's in Uganda, and she started climate smart urban farming. And this was because there was an issue with food security where she was, and she's in an urban setting. but there wasn't enough food for people. And so it was becoming an issue of child marriages. And so she took this and was empowered enough to create climate smart urban farming, which not only provides food for people, but it also is a type of regenerative agriculture, as she was finding plastic containers that she used as pots. And she created basically this urban farm that was producing food and was acting, as a sustainable way of growing food. So there's many instances where this is applicable. And I think because, Raise is really starting from, ground zero, we've been focusing a lot on, the large scale farming component of it. But there is an entire other part, which is this urban setting that includes the issue of food security and food deserts. Shay, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can just kind of speak to from like personal experiences. That's something that I envision for the initiative, which we don't like currently, I guess, have the capacity to do, but something that I think would be really amazing if we could like implement this as an aspect of Raise, is providing youth from urban environments with the opportunities to like get out and connect with food systems and see like how food is grown and produced, like both industrially and regeneratively. Because I have participated in programs like that, just like in my community, because there's so much different farming outreach, I guess, that goes on. And I think like it's an incredibly valuable thing. And, like Dakota was mentioning, right, even in urban areas, food systems still affect everybody because everybody eats food, everybody buys food, everybody needs access to food and to water. And I think people having the opportunity to, physically interact with food and how to process food and how to grow it is like this obvious, concrete, tactile way to facilitate like a deeper understanding of what those connections are. And then like, those kids are the ones who are familiar with their communities, right? Like they know what support their community needs. They know what issues their communities are facing. So then like with, that knowledge of that connection, they can kind of take that and go back to their communities and be like, okay, so we see, this agricultural issue that's impacting us in an urban area. Like, what's the work we can do? How can we address this?
That's great. And it really is amazing how industrial farming, it affects everything. It can affect the climate, it affects the ocean, it affects the nutrients in the food and how big it is. And I like how you're saying just bring people back to where their food comes from, what's in it. It doesn't just come from a grocery store, and the repercussions. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I've got a question now for Dick. And this actually would be a good question for you guys too. How can we identify fish in the market which come from locals like you who follow sustainable practices? And that could also go back to Shay and Dakota about when you go to the grocery store, you want to start buying things, if you can, that are maybe local or organic. But let's start with Dick on this.
Well, Kim, first thing I'd like to say before we go into the question is how impressed I am with everybody that has been in this program or on this program today. I just, I can't say enough about the commonalities that we all have in outreach and how we want to try and help guide people to make the right decision, to do the right thing, and how you go about that, and it's amazing that we all have the same thing that we're trying to do, but just about different aspects of how we want to protect our environment and the ocean. So I want to compliment everybody as to the amount of energy that they put into this and how amazing that really is. So, and in regards to the question, how do we know? It depends on it depends on where you are at the time, and are you willing to travel to go to look for that? There are people that come down and purchase products directly from the fishermen and then take it back to a store to distribute it. We are right now in the process here in Bodega Bay trying to establish a opportunity for people to come down and buy directly from the boats. And that is probably the neatest way for us as fishermen to be able to relay what we have to go through to bring that product to them, and also the freshest opportunity and freshest product that people can receive. So how do you identify local? That's a difficult thing for us to do, but you can ask the person that you're buying the product from, where did you get this? And I do that. I go to the store and ask, because I'm interested. I want to know where that product comes from. And because I am so involved with all the fishermen, it's interesting to hear the responses. But that's my short and long answer.
Okay, and I'm going to get back to Dakota and Shay in a second, because I did get one more question. Tell us more about the straight crab pot lines to protect the whales. But the question is, have you been able to share those conservation techniques with other fisher people around the world?
Absolutely. And you know, I'm on a bunch of committees that are working on gear innovation. So our objective is to find ways to reduce and minimize any interaction. The concept of straight lines is more a matter of minimizing excess line. So in other words, you want that line to be taut. So you don't want all this extra line laying in the water to allow things to happen. And we have tried to emphasize going to a leadless type of system. It's beneficial for everybody. Not only is it beneficial, you don't have to deal with lead at all, but it doesn't allow for tangles to happen, which happens if you have that piece of heavy object on that line. So the other thing I wanted to bring up is that we are recycling our extra lines. So when we break lines and they become useless, we're actually sending them to people that make rugs, tapestry, and you know, all sorts of really, really cool things. So you know, we're thinking about it, and we recycle our salmon lines, the steel, the rubber wraps that we use. We try to do everything we can to recycle everything. So
wow, that's a great example of upcycling those materials to make new products. That's wonderful. So I'm going to get back to Dakota and Shay, and then we've got maybe time for one more question. But if someone, let's say, has come to your community, wants to buy food, what do you think is important when they go to the grocery store and they're picking out some vegetables or something? What do you want them to be thinking about?
Do you want to start, Coda? Or?
I just want to make one comment and then I'll pass it off to you, Shay. I would say, you know, when you go into a grocery store, you can't really know everything that went into producing that, you know, food. You know, sometimes you'll see the organic label, but you can't really know for sure unless you inquire, and even then you might not find it all out. But something I did want to bring up and mention is, while it's super important for those who can to, of course, you know, buy organic and take those steps, for a lot of people that isn't an option. Because a lot of organic food and this more, you know, healthy food, not only for our bodies, but also for the environment, aren't available and aren't made accessible to a lot of people in the country. And I think that's something
Very
to
good
definitely
point.
recognize.
Yeah, very good point.
You know, when we process, these issues. Should I pass it off to you to see if you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of like how to get your food, that's a very specific question to like context, you know, your situation, like financially, geographically, whatever. And I think it varies from community to community. I myself am a big fan of farmers markets. I think like a well-run farmers market that's like representative of local farmers is a great place to get produce. And it's also a great place to meet people, which like for where I'm at, I've found that just like knowing people who are getting you your food is kind of the best way to know where your food's coming from. Like, you know, like I've mentioned, there's a lot of local farms. I've been involved, like working, getting jobs on a few of them. And that's like, now I know a lot of the farmers in my community. So I'm like, oh, this is a veggie box that came from this farm. I know these guys, you know, so that has been a great way for me to do it. And I'm lucky enough to be able to access that, you know, financially and geographically, you know. And my dad was also like a fisherman for years and years of his life. And now like a lot of his friends are fishermen kind of in the area. So it's like, if I know those people, I know where their food's coming from, you know? So like, if it's something you're able to do, I feel like just getting yourself into a space where you can like physically meet and interact with the people who are actually going out and putting the labor into like getting that food and bringing it to your table is the best way to like be sure that it's sourced the way you want it to be sourced. And then also if you really want to support what somebody's doing, you can like ask them, like, how can I, you know, support you beyond like buying your product if that's something that you'd be interested in and having the capacity to do. So yeah, I think it's just kind of a matter of like, what are you able to do? What are you able to access? And then how can you like put those routes out into a community so you know like what the best route is for you to take where you are.
That's wonderful. That's kind of what Dick was saying too, was getting to know your local fishermen and him getting to know other people. Well, great. Well, we do have to wrap things up. There was one really quick question from Sam. I'm going to do this super quick and then we'll get up. But how do you get Amazon and other products it sells to stop selling plastic goods and stop using those plastic packaging for shipping? A good advocacy project.
Okay, so I actually have a very specific answer to that, helpfully. So there is actually a statewide bill in California this year. It is, let me just find it, it is AB Assembly Bill 2026, and it is specifically looking at that issue. So we really, it actually, this is a bill that ran last year and it got pretty far, but it just didn't quite make it. I think it's got a really good shot this year. So anyone that's interested in kind of supporting legislation, there's I can link to the legislative page here. I mean, just getting you know your legislator to support that bill is a big step, and recruiting them to help get it through the different committees. So any bill like that will have to go through a set of committees and then a general vote, both in the Assembly and the Senate in California. So make friends with your Assembly members and senators if you can. See if you can drop into their office and speak to them about the bill. And if you need any more information, I'm happy to connect you with. There should be some more kind of summary information about that